Good evening, Great Debate League. We appreciate you for being here with us tonight. My name is Ebony Johnson. I will be your moderator for this evening. And we are back for GDL Season 3. It's been a minute, but it's good to be with y'all. We decided to do it a little light this time. Therefore, we're having a GDL Light tonight. So one of our shorter versions of debates where we just do two lightning rounds or one fire lightning round between both debaters. So you'll be interested as we can just get right into the topic tonight. And tonight, our premise is allowing youth to play tackle football is child abuse. Two of the guiding definitions that we're pronouncing: youth is considered children ages 5 to 18, and child abuse is physical, emotional, or sexual harm inflicted on a child. Arguing the affirmative is Dr. Bruce Strouble. He is a community builder, freedom fighter, environmental justice advocate, researcher, educator, father, and husband. His guiding motto is just trying to get my people as free as they can be. And Dr. Strouble resides in Tallahassee, Florida. Arguing the negative is Joshua Clark. He is a single parent, banker, and dog lover, and Joshua resides in Johnstown, Ohio. Each debater will have 10 minutes to state their case, and within that 10 minutes, they're able to make an opening statement. They're also able to question their opponent. Up first is our affirmative debater, Dr. Bruce Strouble. Dr. Strouble, you have 10 minutes.
What's up, everybody? Glad to be back. It's been a long time since we've been here having these debates. To my opponent, Joshua, glad to have you here, brother. I'm going to jump right in, and then we could get right into it. Here's a quote I want to start with. If your child plays football, there is 100% risk exposure. It is the definition of child abuse. This is from Dr. Bennett Omalu, the neurosurgeon featured in the famed movie Concussion. He was portrayed by Will Smith. And I think that was when this clock started ticking, where we all saw that the game we love, many of us love, football, American football, it may be on a time now where we have to start making dramatic changes to how the game is played and what's acceptable. We all have seen the recent injuries, and many of us have been aware of the long-standing injuries that have affected football players. But what I want to do tonight is not judge people's parenting styles. I understand we all parent differently, but I want to talk about the medical facts surrounding the issue of youth playing the sport of football. So before we go further, I want to start with what is child abuse, right? This is when you're talking about physical injury on the child by another person. Neglect is also a form of child abuse. This is negligent treatment which threatens the child's health or welfare. And I'm saying that by definition and in legal terms, allowing a child to play youth football, tackle football, will be constituting child neglect and physical abuse. Remember, there's physical neglect. That's the failure to provide either the necessary food, clothing, shelter, or supervision. But there's also this medical neglect, which is the failure to provide necessary medical or mental health treatment. So I'll give you the statute in your state, brother, or I'll give you the statute in multiple states, actually. When we're talking about child abuse, we're saying that someone intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly is doing any of the following: causing bodily injury to a child through any recent act or failure to act, causing or substantially contributing to the serious mental injury of a child through an act or failure to act, or creating, and this is the key right here, creating a reasonable likelihood of bodily injury to a child through any recent act or failure to act. So again, it stems around these words like recklessly, reasonable likelihood. We could all be rational and identify what those mean. I don't think we are far from seeing prosecutors try in court parents or coaches or teams who allow players to become significantly injured through youth football. And why is that? Because we have new research over the last 10 years, coupled with previous research, which is showing us the dangers that lie from repeated head trauma. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention reported earlier in 2022 that youth on tackle football teams are 15 times more likely to suffer head injuries than those in non-contact sports. Football, of all sports, including boxing, rugby, any other sport, tackle football has the highest number of sports-related concussions and other traumatic brain injuries for youth sports. Another journal, the Journal of the American Medical Association, in a 2017 study concluded that 21% of high school football players had chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a progressive and fatal brain disease linked to repeated head trauma. This has caused several NFL greats, former NFL players, to come out and say that children before the age of 14 should not be playing tackle football. The same way we don't allow children to smoke cigarettes, the same way we don't allow children to drink alcohol, we have to think of tackle football the same way. This is an adult sport where only a person who's of the age of consent should be allowed to participate. So, my brother, I want to ask you, do you allow your children to smoke cigarettes? We can't hear you. I want to hear you say
Sorry,
no.
man. No.
Why not?
I don't allow my children to smoke cigarettes because I know about physical addiction.
Because physical addiction could cause harm to them, I imagine, right?
Because physical addiction can cause monetary, mental, and physical harm to them, yes.
Okay. So I think that what we're seeing is that having kids play high school football is not worth the risk. CTE is a terrible disease, and we need to do everything we can to prevent it for the next generation of football players. And one step to preventing CTE is stopping children from participating in tackle football. Do you agree with that statement?
No.
I'd like to hear why you don't. What possibly could you argue that would make you think it's worth to put kids at such an extreme risk?
Well, your facts are supposition in regard to CTE. You said 21% of all high school football players have CTE. There's no way to prove that. CTE requires autopsy. So you have to be dead in order to prove that it exists.
Fair.
21% of high school football players are not dead.
Absolutely.
Therefore,
so this is based off
therefore it's based on a supposition.
Correct.
It's
so
not
you say that so going back to the whole cigarettes or anything that we look at as a test, we don't always have definitive data when we make decisions. We go with the best scientific data available, and that's how we determine when something is worth the risk that's being taken. So when we look at CTE, when we look at other types of traumatic brain injuries, again, the risk is significantly high. So supposition or not, are you refuting that the scientific conclusions, you're saying they're not valid?
I'm saying the scientific conclusions don't have a significant statistical background in order to prove their point. You cannot say that 21% of anybody who is alive has CTE because they have to be dead in order for you to diagnose CTE. It's not factual.
So I understand what you're trying to do. I thought you would come with something better than this. So ultimately, what happens in this situation is I'm going to say, here's what the science says, and you're going to say the science doesn't say that. But then you don't have any studies to prove otherwise. All you have is to say that this science can't be definitive because they don't have an absolute value.
I'm not making the assertion. You're making the assertion that 21% of all high school football.
I didn't make that assertion either. I'm quoting the Journal of American Medical Association.
Thereby, you're making.
That's not the only one That's not the only one I presented.
You are thereby making the assertion for them that their information is correct.
I'm quoting their information as one of the ways to say that youth football is unsafe. There's other studies as well showing that there's other studies showing that as children participate in youth sports, it increases their likelihood and their risk of contracting CTE and other traumatic brain injuries. And this is from professionals in the field. Ann McKee, the MD, chief of neuropathology at Boston Healthcare System, she says youth exposure to repetitive head impacts in tackle football likely to reduce one's resiliency to brain disease later in life, including but not limited to CTE. They also have tracked that the younger age of first exposure to tackle football in all statistical analysis, increases the vulnerability to the effects of CTE and other brain diseases and conditions. So we could argue with the statistics and you could try to pull them apart, but without anything to effectively counter it and show otherwise, how do you justify the risk?
I
Or you say
justify
no
the
risk
risk the
exists at
same
all?
way I justify teaching my child how to ride a bike. You see, the American Academy of Pediatrics says that 21% of TBI-related injuries for children are related to sports. Only 21%. That means that 79% of all traumatic brain injuries that occur in children happen outside of sport.
Mm-hmm.
If you go even further, you'll find that almost 50% of all traumatic brain injuries occur while either biking or skateboarding. So
Okay.
that we consider to be a milestone in our children's lives. That is a celebrated tradition where dad takes the kid out, teaches them to ride a bike. That's a big memory, a big milestone. So is football, but you're less likely to experience a CT, or you're less likely to experience a TBI playing football than you are riding a bike.
If you're in a bicycle accident, you wouldn't just get that injury from riding a bicycle. There would have to be some kind of trauma to the brain. Football itself encourages brain trauma as a sport.
So does bicycling. It puts you up.
No, it does not.
It puts you at a higher speed.
It puts you at risk. It does not repeatedly have you crashing helmets.
No, you just said it puts you at risk.
Yes.
Correct.
Some risks are substantial. The evidence is not going to show that students simply by riding a bike are going to be correlated with higher CTE. What it will show is that repetitive head trauma does reduce your resiliency. You wouldn't be able to find a study that says simply placing a child on a bike reduces their resiliency to brain trauma later on in life.
You might be talking to the wrong guy because I've been through brain trauma.
I understand that. What does that have to do with your bike example? your floor. All
right. So the most likely cause of traumatic brain injury in children is car accidents. Approximately 37% of all children who experience traumatic brain injury experience it in a car. Every time that you get in a car, you are taking a risk that you may have an accident. And that risk may put your child in jeopardy of having a traumatic brain injury. You also allow your child to ride a bike, to skateboard, to play basketball, which is far more likely to injure your child. The statistics on injuries of basketball versus football is basketball has approximately 150% higher rate of injury than football. No, that's the truth. That's from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Baseball has the highest fatality rate of all sports. Baseball, which most of us would consider very safe, has the highest fatality rate of all sports. And you'll see that in situations like we just saw with what happened with Damar Hamlin on Monday Night Football when the Bengals played the Bills. Damar Hamlin went down from cardiac arrest due to a strike directly to his chest at the wrong time of his sinus rhythm. That is how children die in baseball. You have not seen that same situation watching football before. This is completely unprecedented. You cannot find another case in college or high school football where that particular injury has occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, that injury is much more likely to happen in a sport such as baseball or even racket sports such as tennis.
Mm-hmm.
And that injury is nearly always fatal. Thanks to smart thinking and quick reaction, that was not fatal because football has, as you say, a reputation for injury. So we have medics on the field. We have medics available. We do everything that we can to keep those kids safe. I coached football for 3 years. I've coached wrestling for 7 years. Both of those sports are considered high contact sports. Both of those sports are considered to be sports where there's a high risk of injury. However, most of those injuries are not head injuries. Most of those injuries occur by accident, just
Yes.
like when you fall off of a bicycle.
Correct. The
So-
problem here is you're off subject. You're talking about injuries. I'm talking about brain trauma, which is a direct outcome of participating in football, and that is a fact that you cannot refute.
But that's a premise of the abuse. So
It's not the risk of
abuse
immediate injury. It's that by placing a youth in child football, you are almost guaranteeing a lower resiliency to brain trauma later in life. The same way if you introduce the child to cigarettes or alcohol, you will be negatively impacting them for the duration of their life, reducing their quality of life later on. It doesn't have to be an immediate effect. See, you're looking for immediacy and trying to compare that to something that I'm saying is.
No, I'm trying to say that that's speculative. You don't know how many times.
It's not speculative. The research supports it.
You don't know how many times that kid has fallen off of playground equipment. You don't know how many times that kid has fallen playing basketball. You don't know how many times what we focus on right now is football. The reason we focus on football is because it's the #1 most popular sport in this country. That's why everybody focuses on football. However, there are repeated head traumas in wrestling. I wrestled from the time I was 7 years old until I was in college. I played football from the time I was 8 years old until I was in college. I got more concussions wrestling than I ever did in football.
That's your personal experience and it's anecdotal. But the Center for Disease Control and Prevention report in 2022 found that youth and tackle football teams receive 15 times more head injuries than those in other non-contact sports, bro.
They're not counting skateboarding.
You don't know what they're counting
and bike riding as non-contact.
They control for multiple sports. That's what I'm saying. You have to
do not.
Study before you can
The
discount
CDC study does not include skateboarding or bike riding. Look it up.
I'll have
as far as that goes, football injuries themselves are down 14%. And the reason I keep talking about injuries, is the premise of this debate, which is that it is child abuse.
Yes, let's go back to it.
So go back to child abuse.
Yes, causing or substantially contributing are creating a reasonable likelihood of bodily injury.
You're choosing your own.
This is a legal statute.
The definition that this debate is premised on is physical, emotional, or sexual harm inflicted upon a child.
Yes.
You are not inflicting anything upon a child when you are allowing them to voluntarily participate in a sport. You are not. Because the definition of infliction is to impose something unwelcome or to cause something.
Do children want CTE? Is it welcome?
The question is it physical, emotional, or sexual harm?
Your brain injuries
is that it is physical harm, right?
Yes. Yes, correct.
So if your premise is that it is physical harm, then all injuries involved are relevant.
Okay.
So football, then, if we're going to make it physical harm, basketball is.
We're not here to talk about basketball. We're talking about football.
I'm going to point out that basketball is 150% higher in injuries.
Okay, that's great, but we're talking about football. You said there's injuries, there's physical harm, and I said that it causes long-term contributing to CTE.
That's speculative.
It's not speculative. The research is there.
It is speculative based on the fact that I know what I've done in my life, and I played football 11 years. I wrestled 12 years. Okay. I've had my head slammed against everything.
So based on the Legend study, you said you played football for 11 years?
11 years.
For every 2.6 years, you double your risk of CTE. That's based off the Legend study.
That's
University of Boston. Now, we can go and argue with these people and tell them they're hacks and they don't know what they're doing. But, I mean, these are professional researchers. If we're just going to start throwing out research,
how many brains are we talking about being cut open?
They had 267. They had 267 that they did that was their sample size.
So 267 is not statistically relevant when you have 900.
You're saying that's not a credible sample size?
I'm not saying it's not a credible source. Let me finish, please.
Thank you.
It's not statistically relevant when there are, at any point in time, roughly 900,000 high school and middle school football players in this country. 267 is not statistically relevant. It is not even 1%.
It doesn't. That's not how statistics work. You don't need to test every single brain to get a. That's not how this works.
Every single brain.
That's ascientific. Unless you're saying
you need to test a sample size that is statistically relevant.
You're saying that from what they tested of football players at different levels.
I'm sorry, I thought this was my time.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought this was my time.
Go for it.
267 is not relevant when you're talking about nearly 1 million kids playing football every year, year in, year out. That means that in the 20 years or so since I've been out of high school, that means there have been 20 million kids that have come through, and 267 is not statistically relevant. The premise is youth football. We're talking about so every person that played youth football, high school football, biddy league football, whatever you want to call it, everybody that's played football between the time that they were too young to make decisions for themselves and the time that they were, you're talking that's more than 20 million. And 267 does not even scratch the surface. It does not show a statistical relevance for youth football. What it shows you is that cases in which the CTE was suspected, that out of those 267 cases, that's where you get your percentages. But it's only even checked for if it's suspected. 267. How many other people play football? Now, you can say that you're putting yourself at risk, but 267 out of 20 million, we're talking about a percentage that is less
are
than
you saying
1/10
that
of a
the
percent.
conclusions of the Legend study are invalid?
What I'm saying is that the conclusions don't have statistical background. They don't include a large enough sample size in order to make it statistically relevant. I can't ask 4 people I live in a town of less than 5,000 people. If I go ask 4 people if they're experiencing any issues related to having played football, that is not statistically relevant for the country. It is not statistically relevant even for my little town. And that is still a higher percentage than your 267.
In the Legend study.
20 million.
Yeah, in the Legend study, they had 267. We're out of time.
All right, that was a good discussion, gentlemen. I appreciate both of you for having done your individual research. I am curious. I am putting you a little bit on the spot here, but I am curious for a final statement from both of you on just hearing your opponent's feedback and reaction, and the position that you chose to take during tonight's debate. What would be a final statement for you? And Joshua, I'll allow you to go first this time.
So, in my estimation, parents should have the ability to make parenting decisions for their children. That means being able to decide what is and isn't worth their child risking their health, their injury, their whatever. That includes allowing them to go water tubing or skiing or to play basketball, all of which have a higher incident of concussion than football. What I would say is that we as parents have the right to make decisions for our children because we are the ones that are raising them. If you want parents to take responsibility for raising good children, if you want parents to take responsibility for their children's actions and well-being, then you have to allow them the autonomy to do so. And without allowing them that autonomy, you take away not only their rights, but their children's rights. So I don't believe that this should ever be considered to be child abuse, considering that it requires voluntary participation.
Well said. So much. And now, Dr. Strouble, who has argued the affirmative in this debate, your final statement.
Yeah, I think my opponent's entire argument hinged on this trying to detract from the scientific findings here. But ultimately, what you'll see is in a lot of scientific conclusions, they are not relying on 100% sample sizes, nor is it 50%. They get the sample size that's available to them, and then they make generalizations which are logical based off what's consistent amongst whatever is being studied. And that's how science works. If we had to wait till every single person was tested, we would never get anywhere. And that's just not how it works. So, being dismissive of the science and being selective of it, it is problematic in its approach. But ultimately, we have to look at it the same way we look at other things that we deem inappropriate for children. And the risk involved here in tackle football is beyond that of other sports. And that's been demonstrated multiple times in multiple studies. So I just challenge everybody to take a closer look at what's going on here and reconsider that at least before the age of 14, our children should only be playing flag football.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Strouble. And again, thank you to you, Joshua Clark, for participating tonight. One final question. Did either of you change your mind at all? Did your opponent persuade you possibly a little bit during their argument? No? Look at the way you're both looking.
Nah.
No,
but I appreciate it nonetheless.
Absolutely. I enjoyed having this discussion with you.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for debating again. Dr. Ruth Strouble debating the affirmative and Joshua Clark debating the negative. We appreciate everybody for watching. If you're interested in the Great Debate League, we have a website, thegreatdebateleague.com. Sorry. And also we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Spotify as well. You can follow us, and we look forward to more debates. If you're interested in signing up, feel free to go to one of our sites and go to our website and sign up, or send us an email, thegreatdebateleague.com, at gmail.com. Why do I keep saying that? At gmail.com. Thank you so much again to our participants. We enjoyed it, and we appreciate your preparedness. Again, thank you so much. Citizens for a Sustainable Future is the nonprofit organization that we are a part of, and it is an organization that informs and connects especially Black people to what's going on in the environment regarding environmental justice. Everybody have a wonderful night, and we appreciate your participation. Take care.
Good night.